That's okay. Okay, thank you, Marie-Noël. And good morning. And today, Giulia and I are pleased to present some of the preliminary results of our research project, Mapping Color. Let's see if I'm able. Ho spento. È questo? Okay, welcome. The National Library of Norway map collection, card-centered, contains approximately 150,000 maps and covers a 500-year map history and an equally long color history. This provides an opportunity to lay the foundation of an international interdisciplinary research project that combines history, cultural heritage, conservation science, and image processing to exchange knowledge under different perspectives. With this aim, a corpus of representative atlases and loose maps was selected to draft a first pilot project, including 11 copies of the Abraham Ortelius Theatrum Orbis Terrarum of different editions from 1570 to 1612, and approximately 30 loose maps, mostly Scandinavia, from the same atlas. These were detached from different copies, as we can see from the guard residues and the text printed on the back. We will present some of the topics of our research focus on. Obviously, Ortelius and the genesis of the Theatrum, the technological and historical insights into papers, printing, coloring, and pigments, and the preliminary results of the analytical investigations.
Our historical research started from Abraham Ortelius. He was born in Antwerp in 1527. His father was an antiquities dealer, and his mother taught him and his two sisters the art of coloring maps. Together they ran their family business, which consisted in buying maps and color them. They would often mount them on canvas and wooden frames to be hung on walls and sell them to private customers, booksellers, and publishers. He had received an education and would become what we would call a humanist, with an interest in geography and history, and a collector. At 19, he was enrolled in the Guild of St. Luke as a setter, colorist. He would then Latinize his name and officially run his own business as colorist and dealer in maps, books, prints, coins, and other antiquities. In the course of his life, he would become friends with all the most eminent scholars, diplomats, artists, booksellers, and publishers of the time, as we can understand from the many entries on his album Amicorum, his book of friends. And for example, he developed a lifelong professional and personal friendship with the Gerard Mercator. Ortelius is the author of what is considered to be the first modern atlas, the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, that was published in 1570. 15 years before, around 1555, he had started collecting the best and most updated maps he could get, thanks to the network of cartographers he had access to reduce them to fit onto one sheet of paper, have them engraved and printed, and he also started writing the text that would accompany the maps. The atlas was an instant success, and while Ortelius was still alive, approximately 7,300 copies were printed in 24 editions, followed by 10 editions after his death in 1598. Ortelius would periodically update and expand the atlas, and the number of map sheets grew from 53 in 1570 to 166 in 1612, and it was translated in 7 languages. The atlas was the most expensive book at the time of its publication, with varying prices depending on the quality of paper. For example, there is mentioning of a petit papier and a more expensive grand papier, but also based on the binding and on the coloring. A color copy would cost at least twice as much as an uncolored one.
Regarding the paper, if we do a quick calculation, around 1,350 sheets were examined. We know from the archives record that the paper for the first edition was ordered by Ortelius directly from Plantin, who also carried on a retail trade in paper in his shop. Plantin, in the Grand Livre, which includes the commercial exchange between 1568 and 1573, records that between the 28th of December 1569 and the 23rd of February 1570, he sold 47 reams of Grand Papier Real Double Fan to Ortelius. The number of sheets needed by Ortelius to print the first edition corresponds almost exactly to those he bought from Plantin. However, it doesn't tell us much which paper mill it comes from, what size, format, and what quality. Regular purchases of paper are noted in Plantin's ledger, and only sporadically does he have information on the origin and quality of the paper. Normally, size and varieties were combined in kind of code names that had precise meanings for Plantin, who knew exactly the quality, size, and price of such entries. Unfortunately, the meaning of these names, like petit papier, grand papier, papier carré, have been lost. The paper purchases documented by Plantin can help us to get a picture of the paper trade in Antwerp in the 16th century. Most of the paper used in his press came from France, either ordered directly from French paper merchants or imported via Antwerp dealers. If we look at the paper in the atlas, and of course their watermarks, most of them came from French district, especially from the area of Troyes. Some of the watermarks can be easily identified, as they also include the name of the owner of the paper mill, and therefore can be ascribed to a relatively limited period, as Nicolas Lebet, Edmond and Claude Denis, and Simeon Nivelle. The examination of the paper and the identification of the watermarks has, in some cases, allowed a more precise dating of the loose maps. Plantin never reports the size of the paper, but we know that in the 16th century, the largest sheets of paper only seldom exceeded 45 by 65 centimeters. All the paper we observe were trimmed, but by the size of the sheets and the position of the watermarks, we believe that the format was the imperial, one of the large formats at the time. So far, the evaluation of the quality of the paper was done through a visual examination. Of course, further analysis will be carried out to assess the composition of the paper and therefore to see how much this may have influenced the degradation of the colors over time. It was not unusual for a book to be printed on different paper qualities, as in a standard or a deluxe editions, but we found the difference in paper quality within the same atlas. This also was not unusual, as we see in these two maps from the same atlas. In the introduction to the first edition, Ortelius acknowledges Franz Hogenberg, with whom he had a friendly, lifelong relationship, as an engraver of most of the maps. From 1595 edition, the brothers Ferdinand and Ambrosius Arsenius are also mentioned. The same title page was used for all the edition of the Theatrum, with variants in the title according to the language used for the text. These variants were sometimes in form of printed slips pasted over the previous text in the central panel. The first edition of the Theatrum was printed by Gilles Coppens van Diest, an Antwerp printer who had experience in printing maps. As for the printing order, it must be remembered, of course, that two different processes were involved in the printing and two different presses. The explanatory text was always printed first and then in a sufficient number of sheets, and the plate, the cover plate, was printed as needed for that edition. We have seen the long time over the many editions about the Theatrum, so many changes could be made to these cover plates, or to add information, or to extend their printing life. Some of Ortelius' maps were published for more than 40 years, with several thousand impressions, and if they were printed from the same plate, of course they have need to be reworked or repaired in case of breakages. Here we have two maps from Holland, and showing from two different editions, and if we look better in this detail at the sea, we see that it was the waves were replaced by stippling, but of course you can still see the waves underneath. Just quick, this map, the map of Scandinavia has been through enormous changes during the time, and so that we can name states, and this is a really helpful tool for date a map in this, especially a loose map.
The last stage of map productions was coloring, and although the map production was huge in the Netherlands in this period, very little is known on the people who colored maps. As the map business grew in the second half of the 16th century and then reached its peak in the 17th century, coloring became increasingly professionalized. And from the 1540s, we find the profession painter of maps registered in the Guild of St. Luke. So we would have professionals such as painters, engravers, specialized map colorists, and illuminators engaged in the coloring work, but also routine print colorists, workers by the dozen, collectors, and even children. So the quality of the results would vary a lot, as you may imagine. Most insights in the profession can be achieved by studying map colorists who either did exceptionally good work or excelled in related fields, and otherwise colorists would generally not sign their work, especially if they work as servants and were not registered with a guild. A rare source of information is, again, Plantin's archival records, which include billing for map coloring and supplies and prices for colored and uncolored maps. Plantin supplied about half of his maps in color, especially to private customers. And the rest he would trade white, uncolored. There is mentioning of fixed rates for coloring, a façon of 12 stivers, for example, and a more expensive façon of 30 stivers that included the use of live gold and silver. We know that Plantin regularly outsourced coloring work to at least 12 map colorists, but mainly to Mink and Liefrinks, that received an astonishing 36 guilders in 1588 for a Theatrum in Spanish that was decorated with gold and silver, and Ortelius, whose coloring activity probably remained his best source of income until about 1573, presumably to pay for the printing of the atlas. This is a tentative reconstruction of the palette of colors of a map colorist, mainly from historical sources, and only water-based media could be used for painting prints and maps as a requirement from the guild. And you'll notice there's a strong presence of organic colors, and this is because some guilds would also encourage print colorists to use less costly materials, and organic colors were less expensive, and it's not surprising that given the thriving textile industry in Northern Europe, the use of organic pigments and dyes was so predominant, and they were also appreciated for their transparency. The coloring maps was used both as an aesthetic addition and to convey geographical information. Its use was recommended to indicate different spoken languages already at the beginning of the 16th century, and later on to better distinguish the landscape. And this could be done by coloring only the edges with thin, even strokes of highly pigmented paint, as it would be done in functional maps that were almost always colored. And printed decorative maps could also be colored if they already presented an abundance of details. A transparent ground color would be preferred, modeled with shadows and lights, while if they had little ornament, then a lot of color would be used, and gold and silver was sometimes added, thus indicating that a map was not intended for everyday use. And the paints could progress from thick gouache to watercolor transparent washes. The support had to be prepared for coloring with water glue solution, sometimes with the addition of alum or starch to avoid the migration of the paint. And then it would be varnished with the first layer of beaten egg white and gum arabic to make it glossy and more resistant to moisture. And sometimes a second oil and resin-based varnish would be added. All these practical instructions on paints and varnishes could be found in recipe booklets and illumination art books that were extremely popular and were continuously translated and reprinted well into the 18th century. And we know that one of these recipe books, Alessio Piemontese's De Secreti, was immediately bought when Plantin published it in French in 1558 by Ortelius himself. One of the maps of Scandinavia was selected to establish the analytical methodology for color analysis. G738 comes from a Spanish edition of the Atlas, Teatro de la Tierra Universal, published by Plantin in 1588. And both mechanical and chemical-physical damages are present on the support in the areas corresponding to the green color in the form of browning with migration on the adjacent areas and the verso, and fracturing of the embrittled paper support. The paper has a watermark that identifies the French paper maker Jehan Gouault, active in Troyes, owner of several paper mills and one of the most important merchants of his own town in the 16th century. The watermark represents an open hand perpendicularly to a cartouche with his name. And we know from the ledgers that Gouault sold paper directly to Plantin, and transactions are reported from 1575 to 1588. So far in the pilot project, we've taken a multi-analytical approach that includes visual examination and also imaging and spectroscopy-based techniques. The first examinations were done by the National Library of Norway with the video spectral comparator, our document examination workstation that combines digital imaging with multi-wavelength illumination technology, and different light sources were used to investigate the surface, the printing underneath the coloring, and the presence of fluorescent materials, as well as the details of the paints and the watermarks. And we've also made use of the inbuilt microspectral photometer to collect reflectance spectra of the colors so that we could compare them with the reference spectra obtained from the Pigments checker from Cultural Heritage Science Open Source. We also used the good old stereo microscope to have a closer look at the pigments. And for the spectroscopy-based analysis, we have established a collaboration with the Museum of Cultural History, University of Oslo. A selection of maps has been observed first with the portable XRF and later with a Raman microscope. And here you can see, for example, the color red. The XRF detected the presence of mercury, and the Raman spectroscopy gave clear evidence of the presence of cinnabar. And here's an example of the green color that has been observed again with the XRF first, and later with an infrared microscope that confirmed the presence of copper proteinate we are currently investigating. And thanks to the collaboration with the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, we were able to investigate a selection of maps with a hyperspectral portable scanner. Several pixels were manually sampled to represent the different colors and used as target pixels for pigment estimation in a spectral library of Pigments. And we were able to find a match with the vermilion in the library for the red color.
We have heard about microfading testing in those days, so again, we did in the end also this measurement. As you know, the microfading is a non-destructive accelerating aging method that can be used to measure the light sensitivity of different materials, pigments, and dye. This is done by exposing a very small area to a high-intensity beam of light and collecting the resulting data of the reflected spectrum. If we look at the results of the test conducted on this map, we see that almost all the colors have a medium sensitivity to light, while for the color defined as ochre 1 from the Sphinx on the cartouche, the sensitivity is very high. Can you see? It's just jump up. We are still investigating this color, probably an organic one. In conclusion, this table summarizes some of the preliminary results achieved so far. Currently, we are focusing on the reds, where in some cases the composition has been confirmed as vermilion, and the greens, on which we are still working. Today, we have presented a very small part of our research, but we have still a lot to do. Of course, we need to answer to many questions about the elements found, and with the hyperspectral imaging, we would like to simulate the degradation and change of colors to reconstruct their original appearance. Furthermore, we certainly need to expand our research, including maps produced in different time periods and in different geographical areas, and of course, much more. Thank you.
Maria Chiara, Giulia, thank you very much for this beautiful historical survey. I'm pretty sure the audience is very curious to ask a few questions now. We have time for that. We have a hand up over there.
Hello, Lucy Voss from ABK Stuttgart. I wanted to ask if you could go back to the table that you showed, I think just a slide ago. And that's it, thanks.
Can I?
This one?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think so.
There was not any question about it. About this?
Hi, my name is Christa Hoffmann from Vienna. Thank you for your very interesting talk. I'd be especially interested in the condition of the copper containing green pigments. Are you planning to do a condition rating, and are you also planning to relate the condition to the investigation of the paper and the ingredients in the paper?
Thank you for your question. Yes, absolutely. We're very interested in the green pigment, in the green color. It's actually one of the main reasons we also chosen this collection, because it's also a very interesting conservation question. So yes, we will investigate it, and we've already seen a variety of degradation levels, so it's going to be really interesting. And it's going to be interesting also to have a look at the paper and see the correlation between the paper quality or maybe a preparation of the paper that has had an influence on the condition of the green color. Yes.